The G-sharp minor prelude, like its fugal twin in Book 2, is really a matter of the most menial means, creating a great and inventive adventure, a long one at that, out of the most menial of means. The lyric 16th notes of the right hand in the first measure, juxtaposed with the prattling, as David Ledbetter points out, the prattling ostinato bass. These characters will come back, interchange in voices, but also meld together. Then the chords that open measure 1 become the soprano, the upper voice, falling and sighing appoggiaturas of measure 2. So the chordal aspect and the appoggiatura aspect will be another level of invention. But we are also presented with the only instance of dynamics being printed in the Well-Tempered Clavier, a reiteration of the first two measures, but marked piano, creating a slightly concerto-esque texture. And then 2 bars later, when we start inventing on this material, it's marked forte. This could also be very well construed as enlisting different manuals on the harpsichord, so that there's a thinner one for the piano and a thicker one for the forte. On the piano, of course, we have all of that available to us imminently. I go so far as to make the piano also a matter of attitude, a little bit more fragile, a little bit more dolce, and perhaps a little bit more, as it is an echo, we create the sense of an echo by overholding a couple of the melodic notes, allowing them to give us a sense of the space, the resounding space. It's a binary prelude, of which there are many in Book 2, but for this prelude I didn't do much in the way of adding ornaments. I decided to be explorative and improvisatory and serendipitous about coming up with a plan of a bass accompaniment when it happens, creating that articulative plan, legato, staccato, then doing the opposite on the repeat, and how that involves and takes the spotlight away or adds the spotlight to the other voices, and how that affects the other voices with their articulation. Like the fugue that we'll work on, this is mostly a matter of differentiation of touch, of articulation, and changing that articulation on the repeat, as if to say, yes, all of this tasteful work is worthwhile, it can work in opposite ways, and we can highlight different parts of the phrase based on that kind of articulative hierarchy as far as where our attention is drawn. A couple of structural insights and details I want to share with you from the work of David Ledbetter on his own wonderful work on the 48. He speaks of this prelude in terms of its position as one of the complex sonorities, that it's likely that innovations, progressions, and evolutions of tuning and temperament, even from the 1720s to 1741, make these complex keys in Book 2 less character-driven. In other words, there was, in the complex keys in Book 1, there was more likely a characteristic feeling associated with those particular harmonies, and perhaps even with the inherent dissonances thereof, as far as we got away from middle C, the diatonic keys. That's not so much the case in Book 2. As a matter of fact, several people have noted that this has a real G minor feel about it. May have been transposed to G sharp minor to fulfill its purpose in Book 2. Evidence for that, there are some key signature lead us to believe that it might have been originally in G minor. Another thing that Ledbetter points out, which I think is essential to our work on this prelude, he goes ahead and calls them facile means for the materials of this prelude. In other words, the left hand of bar 1 are these chords. The right hand of bar 2 are likely a variation or an elaboration on those chords, making them into sighing appoggiaturas. Likewise, there is a contrast in terms of the material, this inventio, this counterpoint of florid melody, which goes down to the left hand and is taken over by, he calls it a prattling bass, which I think is a wonderful description. Not only that, but the microcosm is enhanced and endorsed, co-signed by the fact that it is repeated immediately with inversions in the right hand, but it is marked piano, one of the only dynamic mark in Book 2. marks this repeat of the opening material piano. And then to make sure that we don't take that as a proviso for the entire piece, yes, here we are, he's written forte. Very, very simple. He states all of the material in the first two measures and then echoes it. The simplest of all possible perspective treatment of the material at hand. And then from there on, it's a matter of variation and accompanying the theme with different invented material, different counter melodies. The juxtaposition happens sometimes in the midst of a phrase. Most alarming and wonderful is at the end in bar 47. He actually inverts and gives the arpeggiated and appoggiaturid harmonies to the left hand, and to the right hand gives the prattling bass. So that in itself is something to think about in terms of the character of these particular elements and how they should be addressed. Because, for instance, if we have this at the end, I'm going to likely take my habitual advice, which is to say, let's always go to the top voice. We'll actually be able to hear the descending figure even more easily in the top voice than in the bass. Whereas in the prattling bass at the beginning, we want to have a sense of, depending on the environment, it'll be more ambient. Or in our forte category, I think we'll actually try and go against the bar. And we can also make them more articulate if we need. Make them more transparent, depending. The main thing I want to point out here, though, is how we're going to make this difference between the opening, and I'd say let's just go with our default when we see no dynamic markings. For instance, in a Mozart sonata, it's, mezzo. In other words, it could be mezzo piano, it could be mezzo forte. Here, I take a mezzo piano, but soloistic opening to this material. When we get to this repeat, this echo of it, I do play it softer, but I'm looking for other means to convey that fragility or that echo. One of the aspects of an echo is its resounding quality in the halls in which it is resounding. I may do a little bit of overholding on a couple of these notes just to give a sense of perspective and foreground and background, the receding sound, as opposed to the more overtly lyrical opening. Things that I'm doing along the way here. We take over the end of the right hand, it becomes the left hand texture. But the essential structural point that we're dealing with here the framework that we'll be dealing with all the way. Here's our bass line. Falling fifth. I love that this becomes a development of an extremely subtle, essential way. Whereas at the beginning we begin with a rising fifth. Here we rise to a minor sixth. It's more tension driven. The invention is also an enhancement of the drama. The other thing I'm doing here with these grace notes, Ledbetter points out, yes, these should be done as quavers. In later versions, he actually writes in the ornamented versions of these. Here, for instance, he's very capable of writing eighth notes when he needs to. These are real Bach slurs, as they are here. There's no other real way to print them except connected, but here these are very clearly Bach slurs, which is to say a strong we can do that dynamically on the piano. On the harpsichord, it would have been an overholding thing to mask the following attack and meld the sound into the already resounding, fervent downbeat to our weak second half of the slur. We can definitely do that. I've marked all of these with you. But the other note that I want to make, besides the fact that we want to not play the right hand in sync, give an accent to that offbeat. We can hear the moving notes. We don't have to accentuate them. It gives us more transparency to make the downbeats happen and the middle of the beats happen in the left hand, the offbeats with the appoggiaturas to happen on the offbeat, on the weak beat, and to have that kind of emphasis. But the other part of this that I'm going to propose, generally, the quaver grace note is a very good idea. What if he wrote it that way to say, I'm not absolutely positive the length I mean to be intimating here. So I've decided there are many opportunities for us to use that sighing motive. He writes it here as an eighth note when it goes into development, that they might actually be longer than a quaver. And especially in this piano receding and meditative mode before we go into forte. Do them a little longer than a quaver. Again, I'm moving the bass. Couple of things here. Yes, I am resurging in a forte atmosphere and attitude, but I like doing a little bit of interaction with our harmonic environment. I've written dolce here, and then I've written agitato in the following bar, and I'm reacting to the harmonies mostly. And in reacting, I'm making these a little bit longer, a little bit more singing. This is, of course, we want to get that tutti going. Sharper and shorter, the articulation there. I'm breaking things up articulatively according to the bass, mostly. So for instance, I have... I'm going to make a plan that will be amenable to our doing exactly the opposite on the repeat. I've had a couple of moments where I've wanted to make articulative differences on the repeat, but I've come to the conclusion that we just need to change the rhetoric a little bit. So if we have a general articulative plan for the left hand, for starters, short, doing the opposite. Etc. And how that interacts with the right hand, I'll do slowly as follows. First time through. So the second time would... put in a couple of marks of ornamentation, but I'm very pleased with the slight shifting of perspective and foreground and background inherent in switching the articulative plan. And when we're legato in the left hand, we're a little bit more detached in the right hand, and vice versa. Letting this left hand be the strategy and then the mirror image of it, I find a nice plan. I don't really find the need to do actual ornamentation. From this point, moving down an entire octave. Bass voice. This is really an augmentation of the opening semiquaver phase. So, augmentation in time and augmentation in mode from minor to major. Now we come to the reprise of the opening material in the dominant. Doing here is we're interchanging the soprano voice for the bass voice, so it becomes slight alteration of the line, and then it picks up again, does exactly the same thing, the prattling bass with the appoggiaturas again in the right hand. Now the right hand takes over in its sequence, similar to this passage here, with new inventions and interpolations, moving down. We have a further elaboration, which I think comes a little bit from our bass. The keening steps. So here we're going to be involved with the harmonic resonance, our landscape, making this dolce iteration in this B major moment here, relative major, and then an agitato again to move us along into the next episode. The more we diminuendo, the more we're prepared for this. Get louder, but because we keep becoming a little bit more transparent here, and now in the agito, one of those places where we want to start making a little bit more articulate the prattling bass, and also the more rattling we can do this, the more noise we can make with that. He really wants that. Keep that as legato as possible. And now the second time I do add a little bit of ornamentation and perhaps a little bit of length to the appoggiaturas. Second time I do add a little bit of ornamentation. Really, we should really make a point of these appoggiatura sonorities. We should make the plan to be that the first offbeat is more and the second offbeat is always less. You're really going to have to do 2-5-1-4 to make that happen with your fingers. I recommend it. Another distinction on the reprise can be a displacement or a replacement of top voice prominence or bottom voice prominence. We do that beautiful leap instead of just the melody. So we have to actually do the appoggiatura with the top voice, but we have to keep a little bit for the leaping voice. How's that? Less. And now less. Here. Very keenly designated as a falling line. So that gives us a clue to how we should proceed in the earlier bars. Want to be keenly aware of the suspensions when they do happen. They will become more frequent and they will play a big part of how we end this prelude. So in the second half, we have the order of events reversed and mixed up, particularly here. So at the beginning, what we're dealing with is the highest iteration. Right hand is doing the inventio and then is also utilizing the prattling bass. There's our falling fifth and our rising fifth. And we want to make a similar plan for the bass here so that we can alter it on the repeat. And so the second time would be. Our new sequence, our new melodic material, is an amalgam of and an inversion of. If we take this upbeat of 3 semiquavers and say that that is an element in and of itself, and we invert it and we get this, and the octave bass is an echo of, which becomes. Octave bass becomes a running element of invention right here, and so it is taken up even more concentratedly in the left hand here. I'm going to be utilizing that foreground and background differently on the repeat. Legato in the right hand, then legato in the left hand, legato in the right hand, legato in the left hand. So first of all, like this. Here we are in the Neapolitan A major for a moment. That's a beautiful, excruciating distance from our home key. And I'm liking to do these quaver grace notes later and later. We can do on the repeat. Accentuating the bottom voice instead of the top voice. I like that the first time through. And so the second time. As the tenor voice of this ensemble takes over, we take up our sequence with a new invention, a new elaboration on our original material. That's from the original, and may, might as well be, and then the prattling bass. And then inverted. The first time through will be like this. second time would be. It's very hard to coordinate, but it also brings up the possibility within this apposite articulative plan that we can actually create a little bit more tension as we go into this climax of a quasi-recapitulation. On the second part of that, I'm sure it would be. Let's make this a little bit longer, shall we? We're on the run here, and we're juxtaposing the opening motive with the appoggiatura motive, and here. These need to be separate. He's marked them so. We're going to go with our plan of over the bar diminuendoing, and then we can do the opposite to create this climax. Here's our wonderful apotheosis in which we give over the prattling bass to the soprano voice. I like to voice to the top with my right hand, rather than. We really want to accentuate the difference of making this a singing line as much as we can. As much as we're taking a soloistic stab at that appoggiatura figure, now completely redeveloped for the left hand, we have to examine and sculpt each of the element's characters as it is in reference to its own region. Its own register and also its own character. So I'm a little bit more brusque with the left hand in this. There are more dissonances. And now suspensions everywhere. All three voices suspended. He creates a beautiful vortex of tension at the end. We can do an even more exuberant repeat because we've established the guidelines now that we've really gone further than the dynamic range of the opening section with all of these characters juxtaposed soprano to bass. It's a big prelude, and it's one that I find ornamentation is not as important as articulative contrast and complement.